good article, you need to answer the essential questions: who, what, why, where, when, how. And I'm going to attempt to do that today in regards to Section 508. What I want to do is use my personal experience with using Section 508 along with telling you information about Section 508. I feel I always need to tell about myself, so bear with me on this one. I'm a native Washingtonian. I attended DC public schools, and the interesting thing is that I learned about conservation right here at USDA under the Soil Conservation Service, which is now NRCS, which coincidentally is where I work in NRCS. Due to my losing vision, I retired from Verizon. I worked at Verizon for 26 years, and then I retired due to me losing my vision. That happened, I retired on Saturday, July the 4th. What an Independence Day. That happened 11 years ago, and I've moved on a great length since then. I went to rehabilitation school just because I was a computer programming major. I have a master's degree in information systems management, and I found out in rehabilitation school that I could use the computer again and that I could go back to work. So I stayed a year in residential training and learned how to navigate as a blind person. I also learned about Schedule A and how you could acquire a job in the federal sector by using Schedule A, and I did that. Well, at first I didn't decide that. I thought I'd just stay home because I had enough time to be retired from Verizon. But after sitting home a few years, I can't do this, so I returned to work. So when I made that decision, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I found out that it became quite a different journey. So because I was not sure how I would work as a blind person, I found that Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind had some jobs as operators. I was a help desk manager at Verizon prior to me losing my vision and retiring, and then I also was a project manager of a conversion, of a system conversion. So because I wasn't sure what my skills were as a blind person, an operator was enough for me. So once they saw my resume, they decided that there were some other jobs. So I was given a contract job up at FDA as a help desk analyst. Well, actually, they asked me would I take that job because I was frightened to take it because I just didn't know my skills. But I took it and I said, well, if it's successful, I'm fine. If it's not, I'll go back home and keep watching TV. So 5 months later, I was called by USDA and offered a job as an IT specialist. And scared to death, I accepted it because it was the next challenge. I just didn't know I was on my way to a new journey. So from that date, I became an IT specialist from when I started here almost 5 years ago. And 2 years ago, I was asked what I consider being the Section 508 coordinator for the agency. So that's that journey I'm talking about I'm on. Now, from time to time, I hear some of what I consider interesting questions. Sometimes I consider crazy questions. Most currently I hear, or most often I hear, what is Section 508? Because there are a lot of people who don't know what Section 508 is. Well, how does Section 508 apply? I hear all those things: who, what, when, how, all that. Why does it apply? When does it apply? And then the one that I think is the funniest: do I have to? So my intent today is to answer those questions, and I'm going to intersperse answering the questions with my personal experience. What? As one of the journalism questions, what is Section 508? The internet is an interesting thing, and I was trying to keep this presentation a little less technical. So I was out there searching for some less technical definitions. And I searched in, I like the fact that Google is intuitive, and I typed in the search box, what is Section 508? And it came back to me telling me that it's a federal law that's an amendment to the Rehabilitation Act. And it mandates that all electronic information technology developed, procured, maintained, or used by the federal government must be accessible to people with disabilities. That's a whole lot, that's a mouthful, but it's the truth. Then I found another explanation saying that Section 508 was enacted to eliminate barriers. In some of the agencies, I noticed that there are what's called barrier workforce groups or barrier working groups. And that's what the intent of Section 508 is, to eliminate barriers. And it makes available new opportunities to people who are disabled. And then it also encourages advances to technology, because if vendors or businesses there see that there's really it's dollars, if they see that that's out there, they will move to work to develop information technology for disabled people. The federal government, there are a bunch of things that the federal government must do. We all know that. But in regards to Section 508, that we must comply when they do solicitation to purchase electronic information technology and services all the time. They should be doing that all the time. Here's another question. Who does it apply to? It applies to all federal employees and contractors. That goes back to my contractor days from Columbia Lighthouse. I was a contractor at FDA, and there they purchased JAWS for me. JAWS is a screen reading technology that allows me to use the keyboard to navigate, and then I go on to, it talks to me. So if you ever go by my desk, you hear yakking, that's JAWS talking to me. And then they also arrange for me to have orientation and mobility so that I can walk around the building unassisted in most cases and find my way. For those who may know me, you'll see me walking around everywhere. People tell me, oh, I go to meetings, they say, oh, I saw you here, I saw you there. That's not part of Section 508, but that's just something that they do to assist a person who's disabled as a reasonable accommodation to learn their way. Now, when I got to USDA, they did the same thing, and they gave me some additional tools. They gave me this device called a Kurzweil reader. So if someone gives me a piece of paper that's not, just a blank, not a blank, but a printed piece of paper, I can lay it on the scanner, and there's some technology that will read it for me. Then I have some other pieces of, like I have a recording device, a couple other pieces that they provided for me, but they've given me tools to succeed in the job. Noteworthy is that Section 508 applies only to federal agencies, departments, and to public, and it doesn't apply to sites that are private or nonprofit, those type of things, or not federal facing. But it's not required, but it's the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. If you're a business and you have, when you want commerce, disabled people have money too. Disabled is green, just like money. So it's the right thing to do. And it's also considered a best practice to strive for accessibility. Disabled people are everywhere. And the thing is, You can't always see the disability. In my case, I have a white cane and shades. So you pretty much guess that I am blind if you see me, but it's not always obvious. In many cases, you see blindness and deafness as the most obvious things that people can see, but there are other things. Okay, some of the other things are there are people who have cognitive disabilities, color blindness, just as that example you see, short-term memory, epilepsy. Let me give you an example of something going wrong on a website to a person who has epilepsy. There is a standard that talks about if there are flashing lights on a website, it can't go above a certain speed, because those flashing lights could give a person with epilepsy a seizure. Who wants to be sitting at their desk working, open a website, and find themselves in a seizure? Not so good. And then unfortunately, with all the wars that we're having nowadays, we have a lot of vets who are becoming disabled. So when they return, we want to employ them. So we need to prepare for them. And Section 508 is right there to help them succeed in the workplace. The interesting thing is that it applies to a lot of things other than a screen reader like I use, or an captioning like a deaf person may use. There are 4 principles of accessibility, which I feel are pretty important, and I learned this when I was learning document remediation. Okay, the first one is a P, is perceivable. Your information must be formatted in a manner so that a person can understand what you're trying to portray. Okay, in my case, as a blind person, the website has to be marked up or coded correctly for my technology to interpret it. So JAWS has the knowledge, but if the website is not coded correctly, then JAWS will not interpret what you're trying to portray. Say, for instance, if there's a graphic, there's something called labeling of the graphic, and it has to be the sighted person doesn't see that, but me as a blind person it has to be labeled so that it tells me, for instance, if there's something in the label in a graphic that important for me to know, then it has to be labeled, and then it's spoken to me through the screen reader. If it's a flower, I don't need to know that. Or it could say picture of a flower, but that's not necessarily something that I need to know, and it doesn't help me with the information I need to know. If it's important, I need to know it, then it needs to be labeled. Then another one is operable. There must be another manner for a person who is disabled using assistive technology to get the information. One example is you can't use colors. Colors cannot be the only method in which information is provided. So, for instance, a pie chart. My technology won't use a pie chart. So, the rule says that another method must be given for me to understand, or a person using assistive technology. So, in addition to a pie chart, perhaps the person would put, or the coder would put a table with the same information, just put in a different manner, but I get the same information. Another example is you'll see on a form where they say items marked in red are required. My technology can't see that red, so perhaps they may put an asterisk or put a note, all things with an asterisk are required. And that tells a user who uses assistive technology that it's required. Now, the U out of this phrase is understandable. The content has to be where the user can understand it, and that basically means provide some instructions. so the user will know what to do. And then the last letter is R, which is robust, which means that when there are updates, it needs to remain accessible. So what that comes out to be is pour, P-O-U-R. And when I think of pour, I think that when a liquid is poured correctly into a container, if it's poured correctly, you don't get any spillage. So I say the same thing. If the content is done correctly, there's not any spillage, and the user gets all the information. Now, another question you get is why? And here's an answer. Disabled workers are untapped labor pool. Because a person is disabled, it doesn't mean that they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the skills. A lot of times we have different abilities, but we still have the skills and the knowledge if we've been given the training. Technology can play an important role in the gap between a person who's disabled and being able to function appropriately in a job. Okay, now here's some examples of information of assistive technology. Screen reader, which is what I use. It talks to me, and if I'm paying attention, I'll know what it's saying and I can follow along. In interpreting, say for instance, just like in this seminar, there is closed captioning at the bottom. I imagine it's at the bottom. I can't see, but there's closed captioning included. And then other examples are web products, computer-based training, video and multimedia products, CDs, videotapes, telecom products. Nothing is worse than having a telephone where you don't know where anything is. It has flashing lights to tell you that there's messages waiting, and you can't see the messages. I can't see the messages. And now some of the systems that they have, in my phone at home, if there's a message, it has a stutter sound. But in like voice over IP, that doesn't happen. So if I pick up my receiver, I know that there's messages waiting. Unless every time I use the phone, I go in and check for messages. Answering services is another item that is for accessibility. Blackberries, cell phones, modems, pagers, telephones, other computer products, CDs and recorders, CD players rather, and recorders, laptops, desktops, CPUs. Then there's some other items that fit this category. Copiers. There's some copiers out there that are not accessible. I go to put my hand on a copier and it's a flat screen. A person who's blind can't use that. So that's something that needs to be accessible. There are fax machines out there where you can scan stuff. But if the scanner doesn't have an OCR or optical character recognition, then it doesn't decipher the text. So when it comes to me and I pull a document up, my system says the document appears to be blank. It says the document appears to be blank. So then that's when I turn around and send it back and say, can you give me the verbiage on this document? Also, even kiosks are to be accessible. If I go into an airport and they ask you to check in, you can check in at the kiosk. The law says the kiosks ought to be accessible. Printers. And the interesting thing that even ATM machines, if you don't know, and you probably have not noticed, here at USDA, their ATMs, there's one on the first floor and then there's one down in the sub-basement. But both of those ATMs are accessible. When they replaced them a couple years ago, they asked another blind lady and myself to come and check them out. I have to use a headphone, but I am able to get my own money out of there. So that's an example of accessibility of an ATM. Another question you get all the time, why? Why is because the number one thing is because it's the law. The law says that equipment needs to be accessible if it's used by the federal government or federal facing. And then on the other side, it's the right thing to do. If you want to see people use the abilities that they have, give them the tools to work with, and often they can do the job. And the interesting thing is that we're all 1 second away from having a disability. You don't know what can happen to you, and God forbid you don't want to have anything happen to you, but you just don't know. So anyone could be a second away from being disabled. As part of the Section 508 coordinators community, I get there's a listserv, and interestingly enough, when I was checking my emails this morning, I got one gentleman who was putting a post, and at the end he mentioned, if you care, you'll do it right anyway. And then if you don't, your philosophy immediately will become, what am I required to do? Shouldn't have to be that way. Here's another question, how? Now for me, how do I do it? I use a screen reader. I think I've mentioned that once before. And I have a note-taking device that I carry around, and I sit and I just take it out and start taking notes. Usually I wear headphones so people don't hear the system talking, but that's the device I use. Okay, and I have a Victor Reader Stream. That's a recording device. And then most importantly, outside of the technical piece, I am supported by my supervisor. And if a person or an employee is not supported by their management, no matter what it is, that makes it so much more difficult. And I'm also supported by my coworkers, and that helps make life easier. But then also being supported by your supervisor and your coworkers makes your employment life better, whether you're disabled or not. Another question that I get is when. And Section 508 should be incorporated from the beginning, or as we used to say when I was a child, from the get-go. And you need to do it right the first time, and that prevents using extra time and certainly spending extra money. There are plenty of tools out there to help anyone learn Section 508. There's a website called section508.gov, has a wealth of information. When you have some spare time, when I first became a Section 508 coordinator, I was given a couple of links to try, and I spent hours on Section 508. And there's a wealth of information. A lot of your questions can be answered by going just to section508.gov. Then every agency has a 508 coordinator. They can be your resource as well. If you don't know who your Section 508 coordinator is, if you go to section508.gov, there's a section there that lists the Section 508 coordinators, their telephone numbers, and their emails. If you have any problems, there's also a departmental level Section 508 center here on the first floor between Wing 1 and Wing 2 on the Independence Avenue side. There's also a tool called the Buy Accessible Wizard. If you're getting ready to do a solicitation, the Buy Accessible Wizard is your friend, because it will guide you through the appropriate things to do a solicitation in the accessible manner. And it will, and then another thing that you need to do, or anyone would need to do, is to make accessible documents. There are training classes. That's a search that you can do online, but the Section 508 departmental Section 508 Center also will do some training. You can sign up, you can call them, you can stop by there, and they can do a 2-hour training. They can sign you up for about a 2-hour training to give you some fundamentals of doing an accessible document. And what happens with that is once you do an accessible document, if someone who uses assistive technology gets it, then your document is able to be read. So that just about ends my presentation. Got through it quite a bit faster than I thought. But if anyone has any additional questions or comments, you can write me at michelle.clark@wdc.usda.gov. My final word prior to the questions, I know this, I'm thinking there's some questions, but my final words for my presentation are: it's doable, it's inclusive, it's the right thing to do, and certainly it's the law.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's see if we have some questions here. Looks like I don't see any questions listed in there, so everyone's an expert.
Oh, I covered it so well.
If anyone does come up with questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us at the Target Center, or you can contact Michelle directly. Thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you're a little more enlightened and educated about Section 508. But that's all from us. Thank you very much for joining. Have a good Thursday.